Welcome to the Garden of Earthly Blights. I am Toni, creator of the garden, and it's a pleasure to meet you this way. I called this podcast The Garden of Earthly Blights as a riff on the triptych Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. It's a painting depicting primordial chaos in all its human splendour, and that's what I want my podcast to be about. Exploring each nook and cranny of humanity, whether it be sordid or splendid. Today's episode tells a story of what precipitated this podcast creation. So this is the story of how I fell into a coma and what it was like. The episode talks about critical illness, hospitals, and drugs, so listen with care. I was really slowing down towards the end of last year in a way that I'd never slowed down before. I'd gotten used to long periods of having to slow down because I'd been sick with autoimmune illness since the spring of 2021, but nothing like this. I couldn't cook for myself. I would walk a couple of meters before I had to sit down again. I could hardly shower. Brushing my teeth was a genuine chore and I was just exhausted. And on the 9th of December, the morning when I had to ask my dad to carry me out the bath because I was too weak, I was admitted straight into the ICU when I got into hospital. As the days went on, the prognosis got worse and worse. Soon I was being told that I'd be put to sleep and a machine would do my breathing for me. In fact, I was so sick and tired of being sick and tired, I asked if they would put me under. The day I was due to be moved to Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, there was an ambulance strike across the nation. I've always had impeccable timing. 2 people crossed the picket line to save my life. I'll never know who they are, nor will I be able to thank them. Then I woke up, and it was January, and I was a year older. I'd missed my birthday when I was asleep, but it snowed, I'm told. Christmas had been and gone, and for some reason I could not move or talk or hear. I was so afraid for so long I didn't know what had happened to me. My skin was the colour of plum. I was swollen all over with wires and tubes coming in and out of me. I couldn't hear anything besides my heartbeat. I remember the first time I saw my parents after having woken up and wondering why they looked so scared. I thought it was time to go home. Turns out a lot had happened during my nap. So I was an ECMO patient, which means a machine was oxygenating my blood for me to give my rapidly beating heart a break. My poor little hummingbird heart. I found out that my heart, my lungs and my kidneys had all failed, but I had a pacemaker in my heart, a tracheostomy in my neck, and a catheter, where catheters go. So I spent the beginning of the year learning how to walk again, talk again, eat again, swallow, cough, sit up, everything. For weeks, I felt as if I was stuck in my own body. I felt so disconnected from it, like it was an alien thing, like I was in a house that wasn't mine. I started to question who I was. If my body was so disconnected from my mind, how could it be a component of I? And if that's the case, why does it matter what my body looks like? And if that's the case, then my brown skin, my womanhood, attractiveness, size mean nothing. Neither do anyone else's. I don't know if it was the effect of the fentanyl, but I found humans so beautiful. The colours, the shapes, the variety. I told my parents I couldn't regret this experience, despite the pain and the despair and the frustration. I've learnt so much about people. My whole life I thought I had to earn love, that if I could be the funniest, most charming in the room, that I'd be worthy of kindness. But I made friends. I made people laugh about the ability to actually tell a joke. I realized it was just a matter of connection, of approaching people with a ready openness. It's hard to put up a veneer with the people wiping your ass. What I dreamed of most and what I reproached myself for not having made use of when I was strapped to my ICU bed was freedom. One day, to calm down after a spasm of negative thoughts, I imagined myself leaving my home under a full moon, bare feet on wet black concrete, just walking around my neighbourhood with a cup of ice-cold Fanta from McDonald's in my hand. I dreamt a lot of drinks. Kidney dialysis makes you really thirsty. When so many things are done to you on a daily basis without your understanding and against your will, you learn the importance of free will. I dreamt of shaving my head to a crew cut and dyeing it electric blue, of dropping out of my elite uni and becoming an artist. In what medium, I have no idea. I dreamt of exclusively wearing loose linen clothing and giving up on shoes altogether. I just wanted to exercise my choice for the sake of it. Now that I'm out, I haven't really done any of those things. I do think that may have been the heavy painkiller cocktail I was on. But it was fun while it lasted. What I want to talk about this episode is the coma I was in for about 2 weeks, maybe a bit longer, and more specifically about the dreams I dreamt in said coma. One thing about comas, medically induced comas, is that when you come out of them, it's not like waking up after a long night's rest at all. Because they have to take the dosage down pretty slowly, because they put you on some really intense drugs and withdrawing them straight away is dangerous. And since they wake you up slowly, and by slowly I mean over the course of days and weeks, you slowly come to. So when I thought I was awake, I was not awake. It kind of blends your dreams with your reality, so there's no distinction between the two.
I separate from them. We don't exit together. I go alone to this lift. And then I go up the lift.
There's a lot of fighting between the nurses actually in my dreams, and it really stressed me out. Like, this is not a good vibe. This is not healing frequency.
People are running around and screaming, but I don't think I saw anything. I just hear these gunshots.
And I remember like the shape of his head and his eyes looking at me, but I wasn't scared. I took the lift down.
It's chaos. Get outside.
I went to then I was already
I was crying and trying to move my body and kick my legs and everything.
Outside, I just remembered what happened.
Then my mom was like, you can't just stab them, you need to set them on fire.
But I basically tried to sat, they were just
I don't remember the very clearly, but
and then we got stranded with GI. That one's most recent. I don't remember the full name. It was a very long dream, but I don't remember the first name.
she actually arranged it so she could have gone herself.
It was running away from someone.
She was worried.
Running away from someone.
She could have disguised.
I was running out of this being chased by someone that looked like me. She was an omelette. And I was standing
Eating some chips,
against the counter.
and she stops.
Do I know what it means?
Hello, Petal. That was all produced by the beautiful mind of Restored, everyone. And the crazy part was how much it resonated, despite me giving them relatively little to go off. Fun fact, I knew I had stopped dreaming when I saw my mum and heard her say, "Hello, Petal." Up till that point, I had no awareness that my parents were there. And so when I'd learnt to write on a whiteboard again, I asked them to come back more frequently. And they kind of looked at each other and they were like, "We've been coming here every day." So thanks, guys. And also a big thank you to Louisa and Reese for donating your dreams. There was this reel that gave us food for thought on consciousness and that whole idea of the afterlife and how it might feel. So we want to thank Nime Ndolo for her kind of inciting of this discussion. And we're going to play that TikTok back.
Ever experienced a gap in space or time? A gap in consciousness? Me? A gap in consciousness? I stay conscious, queen. My third eye blinks at night. I know Starbucks puts elephant cum in the lattes to further the gay agenda. I stay alert. Okay, relax, and that's fake news. I mean a gap in brain consciousness. If you've ever fainted, if you've ever gone under for surgery, you've experienced it. Now let me ask a question. When you experienced that gap, was it scary? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Now let me answer for you. You didn't give a fuck, because you didn't have a choice. You didn't hate it, you didn't like it, it just happened and you experienced it. And yet, everything was okay. Now another question. Is that what death feels like? People like to theorize about what happens after we die. They like to say, "Huzzah, brother! We gon' be plowing centaur pussy in Valhalla. There is intergalactic pee-pee in heaven. Hey, we shall suck it." If you think about it, such theories are so far-fetched when faced with evidence from our own experiences. The answer to what happens after death seems to be right in front of our faces. Third question, tell me about the time before you were born. I'll tell you about mine. I had no emotions about it. I didn't like it, I didn't hate it, it just was. I felt nothing, I was nothing, it was nothingness. We've all experienced the nothingness. When we get sedated, when we faint, there is nothing. Why is that so scary? I think the answer to what happens after we die has been in front of us all along, but as we humans go through life, we like to theorize. Yes, it's fun to theorize wild shit. It's fun to theorize that Popeye's commercials are psyops. The same way it's fun to theorize that after we die, there's a fiery lake or a grassy field. I like to think that what happened before is what's going to happen again. A warm, peaceful, and indifferent nothingness. To me, that's the most calming thought. Finally, question 4. What do you think happens after we die?
So just to recap, Nime asks if we've ever experienced a gap in consciousness before. And, you know, can you remember your thoughts on that gap in consciousness? Did you care? Did you not? In all likeliness, you didn't care because you didn't have a choice. And she wonders if that's what death feels like. She also wonders if the feeling that we had of the time before we were born, what she calls nothingness, is the same one we'll kind of tumble into in death. And she calls it a warm, peaceful, indifferent nothingness. I don't know about you two, but for me, nothingness cannot also be warm, peaceful, and indifferent. I have a lot of thoughts on it, and they don't make me feel warm, peaceful, or indifferent. Yeah, so have you guys experienced gaps in consciousness?
I definitely have. I have this really fun thing sometimes where if I get up too quickly, I like to pass out. And I've been talking to a few friends about that recently, and other people seem to have similar things as well. And I think my first sort of experience of that was when I was in the playground in maybe year 5, I think. And I was with my friend, and I was doing that thing that all kids do where they like hold their breath and like push all the pressure into their face and make their face go red. And we were like not having a competition, but we just like showing each other like how much we could do it. And I did it, and I ended up passing out, and I flipped over a bench and smashed my face into a bench opposite it. And then I woke up on the floor, and It's like in the movies when they're like someone's on the floor, they look up and there's like a ring of kids' faces just around them in the sky, and that's what it was. Everyone was just like staring, looking down at me. And I remember when I woke up, as I was coming to, I could hear crying, and I thought, oh my gosh, who is crying? That's so embarrassing. Like, why are you crying right now? And then like 3 seconds later, I realized I was the one crying, and then my eyes start opening. Then I see everyone, and then everyone's like, oh my gosh, you just passed out. You've got a black eye. Your face is bleeding. And I just remember waking up, and then I think I like stopped crying quite quickly. But the weird thing to me was that I was already crying before I was even conscious that I was. And my kind of whole memory of it was that I was looking at my friend holding my breath, and then I saw all the faces. But I was told what happened to my body as I was passing out, so I can kind of put it together. And that was kind of the first of it. And then I had a few other instances where I would sort of collapse and like fall into my bed frame or fall through door frames, and I hit my head a few times. But I was basically just told it was like some ear imbalance pressure situation, and I just need to be careful when I get up next time. But that's like my experiences of blacking out, I think.
That was like kind of adorable and like horrifying.
Yeah.
What's so interesting though is like you kind of talk about a disjunction between your body and your mind, like your physical body. Because I think that's so interesting that, you know, you heard someone crying and you're like, who's that? Like, feel bad for you.
Yeah.
But it was you.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of, I don't know, what freaks me out about death. I feel like I've been thinking about it a lot recently. And I think philosophers, you know, this has been a big thing for them, if I remember correctly. But yeah, how are you guys handling the kind of, the disjunction between body and mind? Like, where do you think your mind is? And I don't know if we're getting too far from the subject, but yeah.
I think the feeling of disjunction between body and mind comes from like the somewhat artificial separation between the two that, you know, Cartesian thought has led us to consider so strongly. I think, I don't know, I was in preparation for this looking up how consciousness is defined, and it seems two-pronged. So it's being aware of your surroundings and being responsive to them. But I think it's not that in states of being unconscious, we are not aware. And sometimes we're even responsive, but I think it's those things existing together at the same time and completely. But it's not that being unconscious means their complete absence. Like, we're always perceiving, even when we're not aware of perceiving, which I think is what Reese's example made so clear. And like, I remember in my experience of gap in consciousness, I fell from like I thought it was a good idea to walk backwards on this ramp that led up to a house I was staying at with my friend, carrying groceries. And then I looked one way and turned the other way, obviously, because, you know, I was looking back. And I fell. And then I remember the feeling of being on the floor. I remember being in the car and what people were saying to me, like what my mom was saying to me. But then my mom told me that the first thing I said when I kind of came to, not fully, was, how are we going to tell my dad? So was I aware? I wasn't even aware of what had happened to me, but somewhere inside me was conscious that something had happened, that something was serious, and that it had to be communicated. And I had that concern or that sense of like responsibility. So is that, I think what most experiences of gaps in consciousness I've heard about show is that there's the communication, so to speak, between body and mind, as if they're separate, is not straightforward, because the communication is ongoing and one influences the other a lot more than we're made to think as a simple like brain translating sensory stimuli. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but those are my thoughts.
No, I really like that idea. I feel like maybe an interesting model for consciousness of the mind and the body is that, yeah, the two are intertwined in a kind of inseparable way. Like maybe every cell in our body is thinking and perceiving. That's not maybe though, that's like just true. Like every like cell in our body is our mind. And so even though they communicate differently with the outside world, they're still informing, you know, our kind of internal environment and making us think and feel things and intuit things and make us people, I guess, which is
I really resonate with all of that. I think in my example that I gave when I wasn't sure he was crying, I in that point where I realized that I was the one crying, that voice that was questioning, you know, who was crying, what's going on, that's embarrassing, that voice just suddenly disappeared and almost as if it didn't exist. And I think that was the point where that, you know, all those cells, everything in my body that have their separate consciousness, I think that was the point where they merged. And I had that mind and body separation so strongly that my body was crying, but my mind hadn't registered what had happened yet. And I think when I became conscious, and it was like what you were saying, Louise, with the two prongs of it, that it was that consciousness, that the awareness of what I'm experiencing kicked in. And then I became a whole functioning person again once I was awake. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the interest behind the discussion lies, is your processing of the consciousness. Because if I could introduce some psychology to the mix, I had my essay that I was writing not too long ago about visual consciousness, and one of the studies that I was talking about dealt with this case of blind sight or cortical blindness, and it's where you have an impairment or a lesion in the visual cortex of your brain, and it would mean that people with this blind sight weren't able to see in a certain area in their field of view. Or they would claim that they hadn't seen anything, but these studies would imply this forced choice guessing, where they would say, the researchers would say, make your best choice on make your best guess on what you see here, what could be here in this field, and a lot of the time they were able to guess correctly what they saw. I mean, they didn't see anything, but they would say they didn't see anything, but this was the guess that they would make, and it would often be quite accurate to what was there, and so. That's again where this consciousness comes up, because they were some part of their body was conscious that they saw something, because they were able to make that guess, and that guess was informed by some sort of instinct. But they would say that they didn't see anything, and I think again that's where that separation is, because they weren't able to respond to what they were perceiving. And that isn't, to me, implicit consciousness or whole consciousness, which is an important distinction to make for me.
Bruh. Yeah, that is incredible. You know, when your brain's like, my brain's just trying to catch up, if you'll bear with it.
Oh no.
Toni, I have a question for you, maybe tying in what Reese just said with your experience.
Okay.
So we can start getting into it, if you like. So they spoke about implicit consciousness or whole consciousness. Do you feel like either or both or neither of these terms apply to what you experienced?
Okay. This is intense. So, yeah, I do feel like it's so hard to say, because I was in a coma for a long time, and I was also sedated for a long time. As I kind of say earlier, when you're put under, they obviously give you a lot of drugs to paralyze you and, you know, make sure you don't wake up. And they don't take those drugs away all at once, but rather, you know, slowly over a matter of, I think, weeks for me, until you're like sober. So I was on a ton of fent. A ton of fent. And I had no idea, actually, until kind of one day I was telling my brother, I think I'm depressed, like I'm really sad. And he looks at all the medications going into me and he's like, oh, they took away the fentanyl. And I was like, oh, am I just like on a massive come down right now? And it's kind of, so I know that my body was definitely, you know, perceiving and taking all the stimuli around me as input, because even in my dreaming state, I was having dreams that were informed by kind of medical things. I had a dream that I was in an audition to be in a play or something, and I was on stage. But instead of going up and doing a monologue, I was, you know, measuring my pulse and my oxygen levels, and I was doing a blood test, and I basically failed the audition because my stats weren't good enough. Which is insane. But yeah, so it's so hard to tell. And even though I was dreaming, I was perceiving, I could see in my mind's eye images, I feel like at this point I wasn't reacting. I was very much passive, like a spectator in my own mind. However, there did come a point in my dreaming where I became aware that I was dreaming, and I remembered that I was in hospital and that they told me they'd put me under. And I was like, so this is the under, I suppose. And so I kind of got freaked out, and I was like, well, how long am I going to be here? I want to see my family again. I want to go home. I want a cup of tea. So I started, I don't know, I think I was just overly influenced by like Inception or something. I just started doing random crazy things in my dream that I'd never do in real life to try and, I don't know, break the break the kind of paradigm and get back to reality. It was so sci-fi now that I think about it.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of how I would, I don't know, summarize my consciousness in coma. There was definitely a point where it was just me perceiving, sort of hardly even aware of my own existence. But then there came a point where I was aware and I was reacting, even though I wasn't able to physically react. In my mind, I now had kind of a sense of agency, of will, of being an individual that can control things and do things.
Through how you were navigating your dreams?
Through how I was navigating my dreams, yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Because, instead of just spectating, watching what was happening, I was walking up to people and kissing them in the street and, I don't know, like, eating, like, raw fish and just, like, I say that like it's so radical, like that's just sushi.
Sushi.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just, yeah. I think that's how I would answer that question. Thank you, Louisa.
Yeah, that's so
Thank
interesting.
you.
Yeah. There was definitely like a switch there for you. You said when you became a spectator and then you actually had control.
Definitely.
And that seems like, you know, you regaining consciousness in a way, I think, because you're able to have that choice. And I don't know how free was your will, because you weren't able to wake yourself up, but you were able to inflict change in your surroundings. You were able to do things, and you had that choice within this confined reality that you'd been subjected to. And I don't know. I think on the outside, everyone would probably be saying, oh, you know, she's unconscious at the moment. But that's just their perception of it. and it kind of ties in with what we were saying at the beginning with the indifferent nothingness of death and all of that, and makes me then start to think about grief and how when people are sort of fearful of death, and I know when I was younger I definitely had a big fear of death, but that indifference is the reward in the way. That's, you don't have to worry about it because you won't care. And when people have these fears of death, I think you're already grieving your own death, because we talk about funerals and all that stuff being for the living, because when the person's dead, they don't care what happens. So in that moment anyway, and that's why people make these preparations before, because they care in that moment. So I don't know if you guys are following like what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah. I just thought what was interesting, what you said about how free was my will, because I couldn't wake up. I think that just really speaks to this kind of new mind-body model that I'm inspired to believe in because of this discussion.
Yeah.
Because, I find it so interesting how drugs can affect and control, the body and the mind, and how the interaction of the chemicals in the drugs and the chemicals in ourselves are completely kind of confounding our way of thinking and being. Like drugs that can paralyze you, and drugs that can make you believe that someone stole you and put you in the back of a parking garage to like harvest blue eggs from you. Like that's insane. And it's like, it's not just happening in your head, it's happening in your mind, and your mind, I would say is every fiber of your being. Which is so interesting. And that's why I think death kind of what am I trying to say? All these connections and electrical impulses and whatever our mind is, if it's so intertwined with our bodies in death, then I don't know what's going on. Like, I think I'm like, I don't know what to say. That's the question.
What's going on?
I think what I want to kind of start talking about is that concept of nothingness. Because if our mind is our body and our body is our mind, then when we're decomposing and rotting in the ground, or when we're burnt to cinders and turned into dust, what's happening to our mind? Is it like in Abrahamic religions, is it going off somewhere? Is it fleeing? Which, kind of goes with that Cartesian thought of the mind and body being separate. Or are we experiencing not nothingness, but decomposition, decay, becoming something else, transferring energy? Like, what do you guys envision when you envision nothingness?
Wow.
I don't know. My only concept of that, like I said, when I pass out, when I get up, or when I was in the playground in year 5 or whatever, it was immediate for me. There was no nothingness. It was me making my face go red, and then me seeing people around me and then starting to cry. That was it. And I imagine there was like, a good few seconds before then, and probably a bit of time when I was unconscious on the floor. But the only way I was able to conceptualize that and tell people that afterwards was, I want to say time, but there wasn't any time passing. So the lack of time, and then my memories, and putting those two together and saying, well, obviously time must have passed, because you don't just go from standing and talking to someone and then on the floor crying. So I think that's the only way that we as living beings can understand nothingness. And I don't think we'll ever be able to imagine what nothingness is, because that implies that there is an end to the nothingness to start understanding it. But when we're dead, we won't get that chance to start understanding what we just experienced, because that will be it. in this body, at least. Whatever you believe in, you might have other thoughts on that. But in this body, that you're only, and the mind that you've got, you'll only be able to understand it, or you won't be able to understand it. What about you, Louisa? How do you feel about nothingness?
I don't think I'm even able to conceptualize it. It's kind of like the brain pain that I get when I'm trying to think about like what existed before the Big Bang.
Yeah.
I'm like, but where did it happen? If this is a phenomenon, in which setting was the phenomenon? I can't understand.
Yeah.
I can't. And even like, I don't think. So my experience of a gap in consciousness was one, and it was very brief, and not. I would say that I still retain the degree of awareness throughout that. But when I try to think back to the examples that Nimi gives, so the time before you were born, non-existing, and a time after you have passed away, having existed, those seem like different nothingnesses to me. I don't know. Even though, so the gap in consciousness is one, I don't think it does qualify as nothingness to me, because it, having been through that, you go into that with your experiences. So Toni, when you say that you were aware that people had told you they would put you under, you weren't maybe thinking, oh, did I die? Because you were informed by that past experience of being conscious. And then when you came to, you were influenced by the things that you experienced in the dreams that you had while you were unconscious. So then a time before you were born, maybe that's the main nothingness, because not even a memory of you is there. But maybe the idea of you is, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Oh.
And then if you start to think about, reincarnation, then that's a whole other kettle of fish. But yeah, sorry, that was just a stream of consciousness that wasn't, to be punny, but that wasn't very organized.
No, I feel like that's exactly
in terms of the flow of the discussion. But yeah, I don't think we can conceive nothingness.
Yeah.
I think one is the absence of the other. Like, being able to conceptualize is already something.
Yeah.
It seems like when we talk about there being nothing before birth, and then we have everything after, and then when we die we have everything after, and then nothing after. It's almost backwards in a way, like, of how you think things should go. Like, if our death came before our birth, that would make more sense to conceptualize this idea of nothingness, because then you have that everything before, nothing in between, and then everything after again, and in that way it's cyclical, and that's what people talk about, I guess, about life being cyclical. But then my issue is always arisen when it's like, well, but it isn't me, and once I die, life continues after me, and I don't get to partake in that cycle of life. I just have to hope and understand that it's going to go on without me, and that has to be good enough. And that was never good enough for me as a kid, because I wanted to be there, and I was kind of like, well, if I have to die, then at least I want to die when the world ends, so no one else gets to experience that after me. I was so selfish about it, and I was like, I can't believe this is gonna happen to me, and like, why me? Why am I here? And I think that's something a lot of kids go through to different degrees and at different ages. But for me, something that really helped as I got older was hoping and trying to believe in the idea of reincarnation, like you mentioned, Louisa. And it was a very comforting thing for me to understand that even if it wasn't my mind or my body continuing, some part of my life was. And that really just immediately kind of snapped me out of it and allowed me to just be okay with the idea of things continuing after me. And I think that's quite a selfish idea of it, but I think that's the, I don't know, I think that's just what humans are like. And I don't know, I think that it's something that resonated with me, and I wonder if there's anything there. When my family, so I'm half Guyanese, for anyone who doesn't know, and before my family came to England from Guyana, they were actually Hindus. They weren't practicing, but they, you know, it was kind of a thing in the family that they understood they were Hindus. And once they came here, they became Christians, practicing Christians. And I think that's quite an interesting thing to me, that I became quite attached to that idea of reincarnation, without ever being really, you know, I knew about it from school, but it kind of just came to me, and I don't know, sorry, I feel like I'm veering a little bit, but I just wanted to go into that idea of reincarnation, and that is my idealized kind of view of the afterlife. And what allows me to be okay with the idea of death.
That's quite lovely.
Yeah.
I think that is so sweet that you, as a child, didn't want the party to go on without you. Like, not having FOMO.
I think that's just a very Leo thing of me, to be honest.
But yeah, I don't know why. I was raised Christian, and I would consider myself a Christian. That's like my main kind of moral grounding and what I base my philosophy on. But I also find the idea of reincarnation to be so natural and so intuitive, and I think it just makes sense in a way that a lot of kind of mythologies and envisionings of the afterlife don't. And I feel like with my new mind-body model, it's just completely, it completely works. Because I know in Muslim burial, I think you're wrapped kind of in like an organic fabric and placed in the earth. And so you become one again with the earth gradually. And, you know, that energy is recycled. I can't remember what the, you know, scientific term is for like states of matter and atoms or whatever. But we all know the phrase, like, energy cannot be destroyed nor created. So with that idea, it kind of seems like when we die, our consciousness is not being kind of annihilated, but just changing into a new form. Just like our body is changing from living flesh to mud or ash. Or just like, so I just think that is such a nice way to think about it. However, then I'm like, will I see my nan again? And, you know, what of our connections? Maybe it's okay to leave them in this plane of existence and move on to the next, as much as it hurts. But for me, reincarnation is like so natural and so real, and something I really hope is true.
I don't know if I'd go as far as saying I believe in reincarnation, but I do think that I believe in the soul, which is funny because I came to that through a kind of maybe rejection of the body, of the physical. So again, like a sensation of split. And I was thinking about, while you guys were discussing, you know, first understandings of death. First of all, how damn children go through some existential dread and we don't talk about it enough. Like, they're so aware, they're asking themselves such deep, hard questions. I knew I didn't want to grow up. Definitely like big Peter Pan syndrome. I don't know if that was attached to the fear of dying personally or of other people dying, because I was aware that grown-ups were losing people. But then I think my first understandings of death that weren't emotional were like the mythology of mainly Egyptian rituals in preparation for ancient Egyptian rituals in preparation for death. So my dad was born in Egypt, and since I realized what Egypt was, I had this like fascination. And yes, it was like very influenced by kind of, you know, Western depictions of that and retellings of that, like The Mummy and so on. I was a child. But when I was 7, I would go to the library and do all this research on Egyptians, and especially the idea of the afterlife and the preparation of the body to proceed on to the afterlife. So the removal of the organs and their ritual placement into different kinds of jars, and the fact that like as punishment, your hands could be chopped off so you couldn't hand your heart to the deity, which would weigh your heart against the feather and then decide your fate. But I think that was always one that stuck to me, and this concept of like the heart lighter than the feather is definitely something I carry, even though I don't believe that that's my afterlife or my continuation, like the continuation of my path after life. So I don't know. I think in both of your, I was going to say speeches. That's not what I mean. Let me rephrase. I think in what you've both said, it comes across that like the way we conceptualize death has so much to do with how we conceptualize life and what we want out of life and how we feel attached to things here. And I think informed by, how we were introduced to the concept of death as well. So I wonder if, even if these experiences, the experience, for example, of reincarnation of having some kind of consciousness or awareness after you pass away, to what extent they wouldn't also be influenced by like living ideas of what death feels like. I don't know if that's going too far.
Never go far enough. I mean,
yeah.
I just want to say one thing that what Louisa was saying kind of inspired me to think.
Yeah.
This was kind of earlier in our discussion, but when you said about time before us when we didn't exist, but we existed because someone thought about us, like our parents thought of what to name us. Like when they were 5 years old, they're like, I like the name Louisa. Or I remember you saying that you were named after a song, Louisa. And I think that's so kind of beautiful what consciousness can be. So yes, we were definitely not consciousness or aware. Consciousness? We were not consciousness? We were not conscious or aware of our existence, of the fact of being human or of being in general. But we existed. Like we existed ever since our, great grandfather was like, I want, this part of me to go down generations. We counted in that, in the generations that he kind of foresaw. So I just think as we are atoms, vibrating atoms, energy, as our, we are the same matter as what our thoughts are made of. We are the same matter as what our desires and our wishes and our dreams are made of. In that way, maybe we've always existed and we always will. And we'll keep tumbling into different modes of consciousness, feelings of consciousness. And maybe that's what life's about.
Maybe so, Toni. You got it. I
think we figured it out, guys.
We cracked it. Wow. Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for that discussion, guys. It's really interesting to talk about things like this with people our age and gain new ideas and conceptualizations of it all. And yeah, I really appreciate the discussion that we had.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're done. And that concludes the inaugural episode of the Garden of Earthly Blights. We hope you enjoyed listening to this half as much as we enjoyed making it for you. Of course, I come bearing thank yous. First to my mum and dad, my brother Luca and his girlfriend Rita, who sat at my bedside every day for 4 months, who prayed for me when I couldn't, and celebrated all my milestones with me as I got better. I still remember the looks on your faces when I had my first cup of tea after months, on the way my dad's voice cracked when he heard my voice for the first time since I had a tracheostomy. Thank you to all the friends and family for the well wishes, the love and the prayers. Thank you for keeping my parents out of trouble while I was asleep. And thank you to everyone at St. Thomas. Not only have you saved my life, you've changed it. And I don't know how you thank someone for giving you a second chance at life, apart from promising not to fudge this one up. Jingle and soundscape by the inimitable Reese Dodd. This episode was edited by yours truly, Toni Quadri. And of course, special thanks to our very own Amazon, Louisa Carmen, who produced and presented alongside us in this episode. If you liked what you heard, you can find us on Instagram at Blighted Garden, where you'll find art, music, and films to make you think a little more about dreams, consciousness, and the afterlife. See you in 2 weeks' time, where we listen to Mitski and get real angry about how hard it is being pretty. Until then, goodbye.